Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back in time, not to witness grand battles or royal intrigue, but to walk in the worn-out shoes of the everyday person in the 18th century. We're exploring the strange, the necessary, and the downright bizarre jobs that existed simply because a very specific problem needed solving. Imagine the world before a simple flick of a switch flooded a room with light, before waste magically vanished down a drain, before your phone woke you up with a gentle melody. This is a world of flickering torchlight, of overflowing cesspits, of human alarm clocks. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and damp wool. The ground beneath your feet is a treacherous landscape of mud and refuse. Frankly, with your 21st century immune system and general aversion to filth, you probably wouldn't survive the commute to your first day of work. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a treat to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first shift is about to begin. The sun has long since vanished behind a thick blanket of London smog, a permanent gray-brown haze that chokes the sky even on the clearest of days. You are a link boy and the night is your domain. In your hand, you hold your primary tool, a link, which is essentially a torch made from rope or tow dipped in pitch or tar. It sputters and hisses, casting a flickering, unreliable circle of orange light around you. The light is your product, your protection, and your curse. It reveals the path for your wealthy clients, but it also makes you a moving target in the labyrinthine chaos of the city's unlit streets. You stand at a corner near a popular tavern, the sounds of raucous laughter and clinking tankards spilling out into the damp air every time the door swings open. Your clothes are little more than rags, and your shoes, if you have any, are thin and soaked through from the ever-present muck on the cobblestones. The city at night is a different beast entirely. During the day, it's a bustling hub of commerce, a mainstream historical fact being that London's population exploded in the 18th century, becoming one of the largest cities in the world. But at night, it transforms into a shadowy world of peril. There are no streetlights as we know them. While some affluent areas had started installing oil lamps by the mid-century, they were few, far between, and notoriously dim. For most, the city plunged into an almost absolute darkness, a darkness that hid all manner of dangers. A well-dressed gentleman stumbles out of the tavern, his face flushed with wine. He squints into the gloom, looking for a safe way to navigate the few hundred yards back to his townhouse. He sees you, a small figure illuminated by your own sputtering torch. "Boy, a light!" he calls, his voice slurring slightly. This is your cue. You hustle over, your link held high. An agreement is struck, a few pennies to guide him home. The price is always negotiable, a delicate dance based on the gentleman's apparent wealth, his level of inebriation, and how dangerous the route appears to be. Sometimes you get a good fare. Sometimes you get cheated. It's the gamble of the job. As you set off, your light cuts a swathe through the darkness, but it's a nervous, dancing light. It illuminates the treacherous ground just ahead, piles of garbage, unseen potholes, and the infamous kennel, the central gutter running down the middle of the street, filled with a foul-smelling soup of rainwater, horse manure, and household waste. One wrong step could mean a twisted ankle or a shoe full of something truly unspeakable. Your client, unsteady on his feet, relies on you completely. You are his eyes. But the ground isn't the only danger. The darkness conceals footpads, the muggers of the 18th century. They prey on people just like your client. Historians still argue whether link boys were more often victims or accomplices in these street-level crimes. Some accounts paint you as an innocent guide, while others suggest a darker reality, where a link boy might lead a wealthy mark directly into an ambush for a share of the loot. It was a tempting proposition for a child living on the edge of starvation. Tonight, however, you are just trying to earn your pennies honestly. You keep your eyes peeled, your ears tuned to any sound that seems out of place. The scuff of a boot in a dark alley, a low whistle from a rooftop. Your little flame offers some deterrent, but it's a meager one. It's a bit like trying to scare off a bear with a birthday candle. As you walk, the pitch from your link drips down, hot and sticky, onto your hand. It's a constant, minor pain you've learned to ignore. The smoke stings your eyes and fills your lungs, and you know that the persistent cough you have is a shared affliction among your fellow link boys. A quirky, and rather sad, tidbit of the trade is that many link boys suffered from chronic respiratory illnesses and eye problems. They were literally sacrificing their long-term health for a few coins each night. You guide your client to his front door, a grand affair with a polished brass knocker. He fumbles in his pocket, presses 2 pennies into your hand, a fair price, and disappears inside, leaving you once more alone in the oppressive dark. You now face the perilous journey back to your own hovel, your link burning down, your profits for the night barely enough for a stale loaf of bread. You are a tiny, flickering light in an overwhelming darkness, a living, breathing solution to the simple, terrifying problem of a city without light. You extinguish your precious link, saving the last bit of pitch-soaked rope for tomorrow night. The 2 pennies feel heavy in your palm as you navigate the familiar, yet still dangerous, route back to the slum you call home. The air, already thick with coal smoke, carries another, far more pungent aroma. It's a smell that permeates everything in the city, a foundational scent of 18th-century London. It's the smell of human waste. And as you drift into a fitful sleep, your consciousness slips into the role of the person responsible for dealing with it. You are now a Gong Farmer, and your workday begins when everyone else's has ended. The name itself is a bit of a joke, a piece of grim euphemism. Gong comes from an Old English word for to go, and it became slang for a privy or latrine. You don't farm crops. You farm the contents of the city's cesspits. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most foul and necessary jobs of the era. Before the great Victorian engineer Joseph Bazalgette built London's sewer system in the 19th century, all of the city's waste had to go somewhere. For most households, that somewhere was a brick-lined pit in the basement or the backyard called a cesspool. And when it got full, someone had to empty it. That someone is you. Your team assembles in the dead of night. The work is illegal to perform during the day, not because of some high-minded concern for your well-being, but because the stench was considered a public nuisance, so offensive it could disrupt commerce and daily life. So you operate under the cover of darkness, your movements lit by the same kind of sputtering lamplight you used as a link boy. Your crew consists of a tunneler, the poor soul who has to go down into the pit, and several lifters who will haul the waste up. You are a lifter tonight. The tools of your trade are simple and grim. Buckets, ropes, and a large cart to haul the night's collection away. The first job is at a moderately wealthy merchant's house. The owner, holding a perfumed handkerchief to his nose, points you towards the cellar. The air grows heavier, warmer, and more ammoniac as you descend the stone steps. The cesspit is a brick-lined cavern, perhaps 6 feet deep, and it is nearly full. The tunneler, a wiry man with a permanently grim expression, strips down to his trousers. Some historians note that Gong farmers would often work nearly naked to avoid ruining their clothes, which is a level of practicality that's hard to even contemplate. The tunneler ties a rope around his waist and is lowered into the thick, dark sludge. His job is to fill the buckets. Your job is to hoist them up, hand over hand, and dump them into the large barrels on your cart. The work is back-breaking and relentless. Each bucket is heavy, and the rope is slick with filth. The smell is a physical force. It coats your tongue, burns your nostrils, and seems to seep into your very skin. You can't imagine ever feeling clean again. One of the grim jokes of the trade is that you can always tell a Gong farmer by his smell, even on his day off. It's a profession that isolates you socially. People give you a wide berth in the street, and you're barred from many pubs and shops. Yet, the pay is surprisingly good. This is a mainstream historical fact. Because the job was so unpleasant and so necessary, Gong farmers could earn a decent wage, significantly more than a typical unskilled laborer. It was a classic case of supply and demand. Few people were willing to do it, but everyone needed it done. A quirky tidbit about the job is what happened to the waste after it was collected. You couldn't just dump it anywhere. Your cart, now laden with several tons of night soil, must be driven out of the city to designated dumps or sold to actual farmers in the countryside. Human waste was a valuable fertilizer for fields. So in a strange, cyclical way, you are part of the food production system. The waste from the city's kitchens and privies would eventually help grow the crops that would be sold back in the city's markets. It's the 18th century version of organic recycling, just without the pleasant branding and eco-friendly packaging. As you haul up another bucket, your foot slips on the damp floor. You steady yourself, your heart pounding. Falling into a cesspit was a very real danger, and it was often a death sentence. The noxious fumes alone, methane and hydrogen sulfide, could render a person unconscious in moments, leading to a truly horrific demise by suffocation or drowning. Historians still argue about the exact mortality rates for Gong farmers, but it was undeniably one of the most hazardous occupations of the time, not just from accidents but also from disease. Constant exposure to raw sewage made you a prime candidate for cholera, typhoid, and a host of other waterborne illnesses. By the time the pit is empty, the first hints of dawn are staining the sky. You and your crew are exhausted, covered in a sheen of filth, and smelling so profoundly awful that it defies description. You will get paid and you will go home to scrub your skin raw, but the scent will linger. As you trudge away from the merchant's house, your path crosses a churchyard. The quiet, grassy space seems a world away from the foul pit you just serviced. But your work tonight is not yet done, and your next job will take you from the waste of the living to the bodies of the dead. The pre-dawn gloom is your friend. It cloaks your movements as you leave the stench of the cesspit behind, though it clings to you like a second skin. You trade your bucket and rope for a shovel and a crowbar. Your new profession for the night is even more secretive, more taboo, and in many ways more dangerous than gong farming. You are a resurrectionist. To the public, you are a ghoul, a body snatcher, a vile desecrator of graves. But to the medical establishment, you are a vital, if unsavory, supplier. You move quietly through the narrow lanes towards the churchyard you passed earlier. Your steps are muffled by the dirt and straw on the ground. The city is still mostly asleep, save for the distant rumble of an early morning market cart. Your target is a fresh grave. Timing is everything. The ideal body, or thing as it's called in the trade, is one that has been buried within the last few days. The flesh must still be intact for the anatomists. This means you are often preying on the very recent grief of a family. It's a thought you have to push aside if you want to eat tomorrow. This isn't about malice. It's about commerce. A major historical fact of the 18th century is the flourishing of medical science during the Enlightenment. Anatomy was at the forefront of this revolution. Surgeons and physicians needed to understand the human body to advance their craft, and the only way to do that was through dissection. However, the law was hopelessly behind the science. In Britain, the Murder Act of 1752 stipulated that only the corpses of executed murderers could be legally used for dissection. This created a massive supply and demand problem. There were far more medical students needing to learn anatomy than there were executed criminals to learn from. This gap created the market for your ghoulish services. You and your partner reach the low stone wall of the cemetery. You're not a bumbling amateur crashing through the gates. You're a professional. You know the watchman's schedule, which graves are new, and how to operate with silent efficiency. A quirky tidbit of the trade is that resurrectionists rarely dug up the entire coffin. That would take too long and leave too much evidence. The preferred method was to dig a hole at the head of the grave, down to the coffin lid. Then, using crowbars, you'd snap the wood, loop a rope around the deceased's neck or under their arms, and simply haul the body out. The grave could then be quickly refilled, and the burial shroud would be carefully placed back on top of the coffin. So if the family did become suspicious and dig, they would find the shroud and assume the body had simply decomposed beneath it. It was a clever, morbid trick. Your partner keeps watch while you begin to dig. The soil is still soft and loose, making the work go quickly. Every sound is magnified in the silence. The scrape of your shovel on a stone, your own heavy breathing, a dog barking in the distance. The fear of being caught is immense. Grave robbing wasn't a capital offense, but it could lead to a public whipping, imprisonment, or a fine. Worse, perhaps, was the threat of mob justice. If the local community caught you, they might not wait for the authorities. Cemeteries were often protected by armed guards, and some families even resorted to placing heavy iron cages, called mort safes, over the graves of their loved ones to thwart you. Historians still argue whether resurrectionists were lone ghouls or part of sophisticated criminal gangs. While many were indeed desperate individuals, evidence points to organized groups that worked directly with anatomy schools. Famous surgeons of the day, like Astley Cooper in London, had well-known arrangements with specific gangs of body snatchers. These gangs operated with ruthless efficiency, sometimes even attending funerals to identify promising things and assess the security of the grave. They had a price list. A full adult corpse fetched the highest price, while a child or a body damaged by disease was worth less. It was a grim but highly organized business. After 20 minutes of frantic, yet controlled, digging, your shovel hits wood. You've reached the coffin. Your partner joins you, and with a muffled crack, the lid gives way. The faint, sweet, cloying smell of decomposition rises from the hole, a scent distinct from the raw sewage of your previous job, but no less unsettling. You lower the rope. A few minutes of heavy pulling, and the thing is out, wrapped in its simple linen shroud. You work quickly to refill the hole, tamping down the earth, trying to make it look as undisturbed as possible. It's not perfect, but in the dark, it will pass. You then bundle the corpse into a large sack and haul it onto a cart, not unlike the one you used for night soil. You are, in a sense, still a remover of unwanted things, just of a very different sort. You make your way to the back door of a surgeon's hall, a place of learning and healing by day, your client by night. A quick, low knock, a password, and the door opens a crack. The transaction is swift and silent. A bag of coins is exchanged for the sack. No names, no pleasantries. Your part in the advancement of medical science is over. You have faced down the law, public outrage, and the dead themselves for a handful of shillings. And as you walk away, the first stirrings of the city begin. The sun is rising, and somewhere, a tanner is getting ready for his day, in need of a very different, but equally strange raw material. The coins from the surgeon feel cold and illicit in your pocket. You've spent the night trafficking in the city's deepest taboos. First its waste, then its dead. As the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows down the grimy alleys, you are ready for a new line of work, one that happens in the full light of day but is no less strange. You leave the graveyards and cesspits behind and turn your attention to the streets themselves. But you're not looking for dropped coins or discarded scraps of food. You are a pure finder, and your eyes are scanning the ground for something very specific. Dog dung. Yes, you heard that right. Your job is to collect dog droppings. You carry a small bucket and a little scoop, or more likely, just a worn leather bag that you fill by hand. You are a scavenger, but one with a highly specialized quarry. To the casual observer, you might look like just another one of the city's destitute, picking through the rubbish. But you have a purpose, and a surprisingly important one in the chain of 18th century industry. The material you collect is known as pure, a term of ironic tradespeak that refers to its purifying properties in the leather-making process. The streets are your hunting ground. You wander through the residential squares where the wealthy keep their lapdogs and the rougher districts where feral mutts roam in packs. Each dropping is a potential payday. The quality, however, varies. The most valuable pure is white and chalky. This kind comes from dogs whose diets are primarily bone, and it contains enzymes, specifically pancreatic and bacterial proteases, that are perfect for the next stage of your business. The darker, softer stuff is less valuable, but you collect it all. You can't afford to be picky. It's a bit like being a connoisseur of something no one else wants to even look at. A truly terrible sommelier. Let's talk about why anyone would pay for this. The mainstream historical context here is the tanning industry. Turning a raw, stiff animal hide into soft, supple leather was a long, smelly, and chemically complex process. After dehairing the hide with lime, tanners had to remove the lime and soften the skin in a process called baiting. This is where you come in. The pure you collect would be mixed with water to create a foul-smelling slurry. The hides were then steeped in this solution. The enzymes in the dung would break down the remaining proteins and fibers in the hide, making it pliable and ready for the final tanning stage. It was a crucial, if disgusting, step for producing high-quality leather for gloves, book bindings, and fine shoes. As you walk, you develop a keen eye. You can spot a promising specimen from 20 paces. You have to compete with other pure finders, and the city street sweepers, who would just as soon sweep your valuable product into the kennel with the rest of the trash. It's a race against time and sanitation, such as it is. A quirky and rather unpleasant tidbit is that pure finders often had a close, and not entirely voluntary, relationship with the city's dog population. They knew the territories of different dog packs and sometimes even developed methods for encouraging dogs to produce. Some accounts suggest they might carry scraps of meat to attract dogs to a certain area, a strange and not very hygienic form of animal husbandry. The work is, of course, deeply unpleasant. Your hands are constantly dirty, and the smell of your collection bag is a constant companion. Much like the Gong Farmer, you are marked by your trade. You are at the very bottom of the social ladder, a figure of revulsion and sometimes pity. Children might mock you in the street, and adults hurry past, wrinkling their noses. It's a lonely, thankless job, but it provides a living, however meager. At the end of the day, you will take your bag of pure to a tannery, usually located on the outskirts of town or down by the river, where the noxious smells of the industry are slightly less likely to offend the populace. At the tannery, your collection is weighed and inspected. The tanner, a man whose own nose is likely long dead to the world of smells, will haggle with you over the price. He knows you have no other buyers. You know he needs what you have. This transaction, taking place in a yard filled with scraping tables, stinking vats, and piles of raw hides, is a microcosm of the 18th century economy. A network of unseen, often unpleasant, dependencies. The fine lady's soft leather glove began its journey in your dirty bucket. Historians still argue about the social status and organization of pure finders. Were they all just desperate individuals, or were there more organized systems at play? Some evidence suggests that tanneries might have employed their own finders, or had contracts with specific individuals, creating a more formal, if still lowly, employment structure. It's difficult to know for sure, as these were not the kind of people whose lives were extensively documented. They lived and worked in the margins, their contribution essential but invisible. You pocket the few coins the tanner gives you, your earnings for a day spent gathering the city's most overlooked refuse. Your back aches and your hands are raw. You look out towards the River Thames, a great, gray artery flowing through the heart of the city. It carries barges, ships, and the promise of a world beyond London. It's on one of those ships, a great wooden beast destined for war, that your next life, your next peculiar job, is waiting. It's a job that will trade the filth of the city for the dangers of the open sea. You leave the foul-smelling tannery behind, the few coins from your pure, finding a poor reward for a day's degrading work. The pull of the river is strong, a promise of escape from the city's grime. You find yourself at the docks, a chaotic, clamorous world of its own. Here, the air smells of salt, tar, and exotic spices from distant lands. Towering masts create a dense forest against the sky, and the shouts of sailors in a dozen languages fill the air. It's a place of beginnings and endings, and for you, it's the start of a new, far more dangerous chapter. You are no longer a scavenger of the land. You are about to become a powder monkey. You're just a boy, maybe 10 or 12 years old. Your small size and nimble feet, which were a disadvantage in many lines of work, are exactly what the Royal Navy is looking for. A recruiting officer, his face weathered by sun and sea, sizes you up. He doesn't see a child. He sees a solution to a very specific problem on a crowded man-o'-war. You are signed on or perhaps pressed into service against your will, a common practice. Your new home is a floating wooden fortress, a city in itself, teeming with hundreds of men. Your official title is Powder Boy, but everyone calls you a powder monkey. Your job is simple in description but terrifying in execution. During the heat of battle, you are to ferry gunpowder from the ship's magazine, deep in the hold, up to the gun decks. The main historical context here is that 18th century naval warfare was a brutal, thunderous affair dominated by cannons. A ship of the line, like HMS Victory, could carry over 100 cannons, each one firing heavy iron balls. These cannons consumed vast quantities of gunpowder, and resupplying them quickly and efficiently was a matter of victory or defeat, life or death. Your small stature is your key qualification. You can weave through the crowded, chaotic gun decks where a full-grown man would struggle. You are quick and agile, able to dodge sailors, ropes, and equipment as you run. Your journey begins in the magazine, a dark, frightening chamber located deep below the waterline. It's the most secure part of the ship, designed to be protected from enemy fire. There's also a bomb waiting to explode. The room is filled with barrels of black powder, and the only light comes from a single, heavily shielded lantern in an adjacent, windowed room. No sparks are allowed. The men who work here, the gunner and his mates, even have to wear special slippers to avoid creating a spark with a nail in their shoe. It's the epitome of a high-stakes work environment. Here, you are given your load, a cartridge, which is a flannel or parchment bag filled with a precise measure of gunpowder. You tuck it into a leather-carrying box, called a passing box, and begin your mad dash. You climb steep, narrow ladders, called companionways, your heart pounding with exertion and fear. As you ascend, the relative quiet of the hold is replaced by a deafening, earth-shaking roar. This is the sound of battle. The entire ship shudders and groans with each broadside fired. The air becomes thick with acrid black smoke that stings your eyes and clogs your throat. A familiar sensation from your time as a link boy, but 1,000 times more intense. The gun deck is a vision of hell. Men, stripped to the waist and blackened with powder residue, work in practiced, frantic harmony to load, aim, and fire the massive cannons. The noise is so loud it can cause permanent hearing loss, and many gunners were deafened by their trade. Your job is to run this gauntlet. You deliver your cartridge to a gun crew and immediately turn to run back for another. You don't have time to be scared, but the terror is a cold knot in your stomach. All around you is the evidence of the battle's ferocity. Splinters, as large as daggers, fly through the air as enemy cannonballs smash into the ship's oak hull. A quirky and horrifying tidbit is that these splinters, not the cannonballs themselves, were often the main cause of injury and death on a gun deck. They could tear through a man with ease. You see things no child should see. The deck is slick with blood and sweat. Wounded men are dragged away, their cries lost in the cacophony. You have to leap over the bodies of the fallen. Your only focus is your task. Get the powder to the guns. The gun crews depend on you. The captain depends on you. The fate of the ship depends on this relentless, terrifying cycle. Historians still argue about the level of coercion involved in recruiting boys for the Navy. While some boys, particularly from seafaring families, may have joined willingly, many were orphans, runaways, or from destitute families with no other options. The Navy offered the promise of regular meals and pay, a powerful lure for a starving child. But the reality was a life of brutal discipline and extreme danger. There is no glory in your work. You are not a soldier. You are a cog in a great, violent machine. You are a living conveyor belt, a small, expendable part of a system designed to project the power of the British Empire across the oceans. It's a job born of necessity, the need to move a dangerous substance through a dangerous environment as quickly as possible. And the only people small enough and, frankly, expendable enough to do it were children. As the battle rages on, you run and run, your small legs carrying the fuel for the ship's fury. The noise, the smoke, the fear. It all blends into a single, overwhelming experience. And as you scramble back towards the magazine for another cartridge, you can't help but notice the other small inhabitants of the ship, the ones that thrive in the dark, cramped spaces of the hold, the rats. Dealing with them is someone else's problem, and it's a job that requires a very different kind of skill. The thunder of the cannons fades into a dull ringing in your ears as your consciousness shifts away from the terrifying gun deck of the man-o'-war. You are back on dry land, back in the familiar, grimy streets of London, but the sense of being in a constant low-grade war remains. This time, the enemy is smaller, furrier, and far more numerous. You are a rat catcher, a professional exterminator in an age before chemical pesticides. Your battlefield is the cellars, sewers, and slums of the city, and your foe is one of humanity's oldest companions, the rat. You cut a distinctive figure. Your clothing is sturdy leather and canvas, not for fashion, but for protection against the bites and scratches of your quarry. Across your shoulder, you carry a bag that squirms and occasionally squeaks. Your most important tool, however, walks at your side. A well-trained terrier, a feisty, tenacious dog bred specifically for this purpose. The bond between you and your dog is the cornerstone of your business. You are a team, a partnership forged in the dark, rat-infested corners of the city. The problem you're paid to solve is ancient and pervasive. A mainstream historical fact is that 18th-century cities were breeding grounds for rats. The lack of systematic waste disposal, the overflowing cesspits you remember from your time as a Gong Farmer, the open sewers, and the granaries all provided an endless feast for rodent populations. They were not just a nuisance, they were a direct threat. They destroyed food stores, gnawed through structures, and, most terrifyingly, were known carriers of disease. While the direct link between rats, fleas, and the plague wasn't fully understood, people knew that sickness often followed in the wake of a rat infestation. Your first call of the day is to a baker's shop. The baker, a man with flour dusting his eyebrows, is frantic. He shows you the evidence. Sacks of flour torn open, loaves of bread gnawed, and the telltale droppings everywhere. His livelihood is at risk. This is where your expertise comes in. You don't just kill rats, you understand them. You know their habits, their pathways, their nests. You are a detective of vermin. You begin your work by releasing your terrier into the bakery's cellar. The dog is a whirlwind of focused energy, its nose twitching, its body low to the ground. It immediately bolts towards a dark corner, barking furiously. While the dog goes to work, you employ your own methods. You might set simple but effective snap traps, or use bait laced with poisons like arsenic, a dangerous game, as you have to ensure it doesn't contaminate the baker's goods. A true professional, however, had a flair for the dramatic. A quirky and fascinating tidbit of the trade is that many rat catchers were showmen as much as they were exterminators. The most famous of them all, a man named Jack Black, who was Queen Victoria's personal rat catcher in the 19th century, but whose methods were rooted in 18th century traditions, would create a public spectacle. He would often catch rats alive, placing them in a small, caged arena. He would then take wagers from onlookers on how many rats his prize terrier could kill in a set amount of time. This grim sport, known as rat baiting, was a popular form of entertainment in pubs and marketplaces. It was a clever marketing strategy. You not only get paid to clear an infestation, but you can also make money from the captured rats afterwards. It's like getting paid to take out the trash and then getting a bonus for recycling it into a gladiatorial show. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these early pest controllers. While a skilled rat catcher could certainly clear a single building of an infestation, could they really make a dent in the city's overall rat population? It seems unlikely. They were providing a temporary solution to a systemic problem. Without addressing the underlying issues of sanitation and waste, the rats would always return. The rat catcher's job was, in a sense, guaranteed for life. He was treating the symptom, not the disease, which from a business perspective is not a bad model. As your terrier dispatches another rat with a swift, brutal shake of its head, you uncover a large nest behind a stack of old barrels. You use a pair of long-handled tongs to grab the live ones, depositing them into your wriggling bag. The baker watches, a mixture of disgust and relief on his face. You are performing a service that is both essential and repulsive. You are a protector of public health and property, a frontline soldier in the war against filth and disease. By the end of the afternoon, the bakery is quiet. The immediate threat has been neutralized. You present the baker with a string of dead rats as proof of your success, a common practice to justify your fee. He pays you and you move on, your dog trotting proudly at your heel, your bag of live rats destined for a pub where you'll earn a few more shillings from the evening's entertainment. As winter approaches, the city's problems shift. The cold brings its own set of challenges and creates a demand for a different kind of commodity, one that must be harvested from the frozen countryside, a luxury for the city's elite. You leave the rat-infested bakery behind, the terrier's triumphant panting a stark contrast to the quiet skittering you've been hunting all day. The coins from the baker are enough for a warm meal, but as the days grow shorter and a sharp, biting wind whips through the alleys, a new kind of work becomes available. You trade the grime of the city for the crisp, clean air of the countryside. Winter has frozen the ponds and lakes into solid sheets of glass, and the wealthy elite of London have a craving for something that only this cold can provide: ice. You are now an ice harvester. This job is a world away from the claustrophobic filth of your previous professions. You are out in the open under a vast gray sky. The landscape is stark and beautiful, covered in a blanket of snow. But this isn't a leisurely skate on a frozen pond. This is hard, physical labor in punishing conditions. Your tools are long-toothed saws, heavy iron tongs, and horse-drawn sledges. Your uniform is whatever thick, woolen clothing you can afford to ward off the life-threatening cold. The demand for ice is a fascinating aspect of 18th century high society. A key historical fact is that while refrigeration technology was centuries away, the concept of using ice to cool drinks and preserve food was a well-established luxury for the very rich. Aristocrats and wealthy merchants built insulated ice houses on their estates, deep, often underground, brick-lined pits with thick, thatched roofs. These were the primitive freezers of their day. Properly packed with straw or sawdust, a fully stocked ice house could keep its contents frozen well into the summer months, allowing its owner to serve chilled wine, create exotic frozen desserts like sorbet, and preserve game and fish long after their contemporaries' food had spoiled. It was a potent symbol of wealth and status. Your workday starts before dawn. The cold is at its most intense, a deep, penetrating chill that makes your bones ache. You and your crew walk out onto the surface of a large, frozen lake. The first task is to clear the snow, revealing the clear, black ice beneath. Then the scorers get to work. Using a horse-drawn, plow-like device with a sharp blade, they score a grid pattern into the ice, marking out the blocks to be cut. It looks like a giant, frozen checkerboard stretching across the lake. Then comes your job. You are a cutter. Wielding a massive saw nearly as tall as you are, you have to cut along the scored lines. This grueling work. You and a partner work a saw together, its sharp teeth biting into the ice, sending up a spray of frigid crystals. Your hands, even in thick mittens, quickly become numb. Your breath plumes in the air. The danger is obvious and ever-present. The ice groans and cracks under the strain of dozens of men and horses. Falling into the lethally cold water is a constant fear. A man who goes under has only minutes before hypothermia renders him unconscious. Rescue is difficult and often too late. It's a job where one clumsy move could be your last. It's like working on a construction site made of the very thing that could kill you. Once a long channel is cut, you use heavy, iron pikes and bars to break the large floats of ice free. Then, men with giant tongs, like oversized sugar tongs for a giant, grab the individual blocks, which can weigh up to 300 pounds. They guide them down the channel towards the shore, where other teams wait with horse-drawn sledges. The blocks are loaded onto the sledges and then hauled to the ice house. A quirky tidbit about this process is the science, or lack thereof, behind it. The best ice was considered to be the clearest ice. Ice harvesters and their clients believed that clear ice was colder and lasted longer than cloudy ice, which was thought to contain impurities. While there's some truth to this regarding density, it became a point of pride. A host would want to serve drinks chilled with perfectly transparent ice, not cloudy, common-looking stuff. This created a demand for ice from specific ponds known for their pure water. The final, crucial step is packing the ice house. This is a skill in itself. The blocks must be fitted together as tightly as possible, with layers of insulating material like sawdust or straw packed between them and around the entire stack. The goal is to create a single, solid mass that will resist melting for as long as possible. Historians still argue about the precise efficiency of these ice houses, but the best ones were remarkably effective. Some accounts claim that a well-stocked ice house could preserve ice for up to 2 or 3 years, though this was likely an exaggeration. Still, Their ability to provide a taste of winter in the sweltering heat of July was seen as nothing short of miraculous. At the end of a long, exhausting day, your body aches with a deep, cold fatigue. You are soaked, freezing, and have earned your pay through sheer brute force. You have wrestled a luxury good from the hostile grip of nature. As you watch the last sledgeload of ice disappear towards the grand estate on the hill, you think about the small, intricate things that such wealth can buy. Not just chilled wine, but every tiny component of a comfortable life, down to the smallest, most insignificant seeming object like a simple metal pin. And making those pins is another job entirely, a task that trades the grand scale of the frozen lake for the mind-numbing repetition of a tiny workshop. The bone-deep cold of the ice harvest fades as you move from the open, frozen lake to the cramped, stuffy confines of a small urban workshop. The air here is warm, filled with the metallic tang of wire and the rhythmic, repetitive sounds of hammering and grinding. You have traded a job of immense physical exertion and mortal danger for one of mind-numbing tedium and precision. You are now a pin maker, or more accurately, one small part of a pin-making assembly line. Your new role seems, on the surface, incredibly simple. In front of you is a coil of brass wire and a cutting tool. Your entire world, for 10 to 12 hours a day, consists of pulling a length of wire and cutting it to a precise uniform size. That's it. You are the cutter. The person next to you is the sharpener. The person next to them is the head cutter, and so on. This is your life now. Cut, drop, pull, cut, drop, pull. The pile of tiny metal shafts beside you grows, a testament to a day spent in the service of a single, minuscule action. The mainstream historical fact that perfectly encapsulates your new job comes from the father of modern economics himself, Adam Smith. In his seminal 1776 work, The Wealth of Nations, Smith used a pin factory as his prime example to explain the concept of the division of labor. He observed that a single, untrained worker trying to make a whole pin by himself, drawing the wire, straightening it, cutting it, pointing it, grinding the top, making the head, attaching the head, and then packaging the pin, might struggle to make even one pin a day and certainly no more than 20. However, by dividing the process into distinct, specialized tasks, a small workshop of 10 people could produce a staggering 48,000 pins in a single day. You are a living embodiment of Adam Smith's theory, a specialist in a task that takes seconds to perform and a lifetime to endure. The process is a masterpiece of efficiency, if not of job satisfaction. The wire is drawn out by one worker. You cut it. Another worker takes your cut pieces and sharpens them to a point on a grinding stone, a shower of tiny sparks marking their progress. Meanwhile, in another part of the workshop, a different process is happening to create the heads. A piece of wire is flattened, then stamped to create the tiny, round head. This head then has to be attached to the sharpened shaft, a delicate and crucial task. Finally, the finished pins are polished and then inserted into paper sheets for sale. It took, by Smith's count, about 18 distinct operations to create one simple common pin. Your contribution, while essential, feels laughably small. It's the 18th century equivalent of being the person who only ever puts the letter E into a Word document. A quirky, and rather insightful, tidbit from this era is the origin of the phrase pin money. Today, it refers to a small amount of money set aside for trivial expenses. But its origin is literal. In many places, a husband would give his wife an allowance specifically for the purchase of pins and other sewing notions. Pins were a small but constant expense for any household, necessary for fastening clothes, headdresses, and all manner of textiles before the mass production of buttons and zippers. The ability to afford a steady supply of good quality pins was a small marker of domestic stability. So, your tedious work is directly contributing to the literally named pin money funds of women across the country. The work is not without its physical toll. The repetitive motion leads to aches in your wrists and hands. The air is filled with fine metal dust from the grinders, which irritates your lungs. A less dramatic version of the coal or pitch smoke you've inhaled in other lives, but a persistent irritant nonetheless. Your eyes strain to focus on the tiny objects in the dim light of the workshop. And then there is the mental toll. The sheer monotony is crushing. There is no creativity, no problem solving, just the endless replication of one simple movement. Historians still argue about the social and psychological impact of this early form of factory work. Was the trade-off of higher productivity and cheaper goods worth the dehumanizing effect of such fragmented labor? The pin factory represents a pivotal moment in the transition from skilled artisan to specialized worker. Before, a single craftsman might have taken pride in producing a finished object from start to finish. Now, you are alienated from the final product. You don't make pins, you cut wires that will eventually become part of a pin. This shift would define the coming industrial revolution, creating immense wealth and progress, but also new forms of human misery and social dislocation. You watch the pile of tiny wires grow, each one identical to the last. They are a physical representation of your day, your week, your life. These small, sharp objects are essential for holding the world together, for fastening a lady's dress, for securing a doctor's bandage. And speaking of doctors, the medical world has its own set of peculiar needs, its own strange harvests. As you finish your shift, your mind wanders from the sharp, sterile world of metal pins to the damp, living world of the marshes, where another essential, but far more unsettling, commodity is being gathered. You escape the monotonous clatter of the pin factory, your hands still phantom feeling the motion of cutting wire. You crave a return to the natural world, but the profession that awaits you there is far from a pastoral dream. You find yourself on the edge of a vast, marshy wetland, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The water is murky, still, and teeming with unseen life. You roll up your trousers, take a deep breath, and wade into the shallows. You are a leech collector, and you are about to become a walking buffet for your merchandise. Your tools are deceptively simple. Your own 2 legs and a tin can with small perforations to carry your catch. Some of your more seasoned, or perhaps more cautious, colleagues might use a horse, driving the poor animal into the water to act as bait instead. But you are on your own today, and your own skin will have to do. You trudge slowly through the muddy, knee-deep water, the cold ooze squelching between your toes. You are stirring up the environment, making your presence known to the creatures you seek. And then you feel it. Tiny, sharp prick on your ankle, then another on your calf. You resist the urge to immediately swat them away. These are not pests to be feared. They are your product. The medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis, has found you. You wait patiently, as more of the small, segmented worms attach themselves to your exposed legs. It's a deeply unsettling sensation, a quiet, deliberate violation. You are being fed upon willingly. This is the job. It's a career choice that requires a certain detachment from your own bodily integrity. The mainstream historical fact underpinning your strange occupation is the dominance of humoral theory in medicine. For centuries, right up through the 18th century and beyond, Western medicine was largely based on the ancient Greek idea that the body contained 4 essential fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was believed to be caused by an imbalance of these humors. Therefore, the cure was to rebalance them. Bloodletting was the most common method for treating a supposed excess of blood, which was blamed for everything from fevers and inflammation to headaches and madness. While surgeons could perform venesection, cutting a vein, leeches offered a gentler, more localized alternative. They became the go-to treatment for a vast array of ailments. After you've collected a sufficient number of passengers on your legs, you carefully wade back to the bank. Now comes the delicate part, harvesting. You can't just pull them off, as their tiny, serrated jaws might break off in your skin, causing infection. Instead, you encourage them to detach, sometimes by sprinkling a bit of salt or vinegar on them. One by one, you pluck the now engorged, blood-filled leeches from your legs and drop them into your tin. Your legs are a mess of small, bleeding wounds that will continue to trickle for some time, thanks to the anticoagulant, hirutin, in the leech's saliva. This, incidentally, is what made them so medically valuable. A quirky tidbit about this profession is the sheer scale of the leech trade. This wasn't some niche folk remedy business. This was a massive industry. In the early 19th century, which was the absolute peak of what historians call leech mania, France was importing some 40 million leeches a year for medical purposes. Britain was another huge consumer. This immense demand led to overharvesting, and the medicinal leech became endangered in many parts of Europe. This, in turn, drove up the price and made leech collecting a surprisingly lucrative, if hazardous, profession. Fortunes were made, and rivalries between leech collectors in prime territories could become intense. You pack your tin with damp moss to keep your precious cargo healthy and begin the journey back to town. Your customers are apothecaries and doctors, who will keep the leeches in jars of fresh water, ready for their next patient. You are a supplier for the medical establishment, just like the Resurrectionist, but your work is legal, if equally strange. You provide a living, breathing pharmaceutical. Historians still argue about the actual medical efficacy of leeching. While we now know that hirudin is a powerful anticoagulant and that leech therapy has found some modern uses, particularly in reattaching severed digits by promoting blood flow, the 18th century applications were far less scientific. Did bleeding a patient for a fever actually help? Almost certainly not. In many cases, it likely weakened an already sick patient, sometimes hastening their demise. Yet, for centuries, it was considered standard, cutting-edge medical practice. The belief in its power was total both for the physician and the patient. As you limp back towards the city, your ankles dotted with bloody spots, you feel a profound sense of fatigue. The day's work is done. You have used your own body as bait to gather a tool for healing, a living paradox of a profession. The city is settling into its evening rhythm. The lamplighters are beginning their rounds, and soon, the link boys will be out. But before the city sleeps, it must be woken up. And as the sun sets on your day in the marshes, you can already hear the first stirrings of the man whose job it is to rouse the city from its slumber. Your leech-bitten ankles are a dull, itchy memory as you transition from the wild marshes to the dense, sleeping warren of a northern industrial town. The moon is high, but the sky is hazed over with the perpetual smoke from factory chimneys. It is the dead of night, the small hours, when the world is supposed to be quiet. But in this town, the great machines of the burgeoning industrial revolution demand to be fed at all hours. Workers are needed for early shifts, long before the sun itself is willing to get up. And that's where you come in. You are a knocker-upper, the human alarm clock. Your equipment is simple, low-tech, and effective. You carry a long, lightweight pole, often made of bamboo, with a bundle of wires or a knob at the end. For clients on the ground floor, a sharp rap on the door with a heavy stick will suffice. But your real skill lies in reaching the upper floors, the small attic rooms where whole families sleep. Your long pole is your instrument, allowing you to reach up and tap insistently on a bedroom window 2 or 3 stories off the ground. You are the antithesis of sleep, the bringer of the unwelcome morning. You have a route, a list of clients who have paid you a few pence a week for your service. You are a freelance professional, a crucial part of the industrial ecosystem. The factory owner needs his workers at the looms by 6 a.m. The workers, exhausted from a 12-hour shift the day before, are deep in a slumber that their bodies desperately need. Without you, the great engine of industry would sputter and stall. You are the link between human exhaustion and mechanical demand. The job requires a good memory and a punctual nature. You have to remember who lives where, what window is theirs, and at what specific time they need to be roused. Mr. Grimshaw at number 12 needs his tap at 4:30 a.m. The 3 sisters at number 27 get their wake-up call at 5 a.m. sharp. You move through the silent, cobblestone streets, your footsteps echoing in the quiet. The only other person you might see is the night watchman, making his rounds and calling out the hour. A key historical fact here is that while the knocker-upper is often associated with the Victorian era, the profession began in the late 18th century with the rise of the first factories. Before industrialization, most people's lives were governed by the sun. You woke at dawn and slept at dusk. But the factory whistle, not the rooster, now dictated the rhythms of life. Affordable and reliable alarm clocks were not widely available until much later. So, for decades, the task of waking the workforce fell to a human being. It was a job created entirely by a technological shift. You reach the home of one of your clients, a weaver who works at the nearby cotton mill. His window is on the 2nd floor. You position your long pole and begin to tap, a sharp, rhythmic sound designed to cut through the deepest sleep. You don't stop until you see a candle flicker to life inside or a sleepy face appear at the window to acknowledge you. This is the code of your profession. You never leave a client until you are sure they are awake. To do so would be a betrayal of their trust and would quickly ruin your reputation. It's a bit like being a pizza delivery guy, but instead of bringing them food, you bring them the grim reality of another workday, and you can't leave until they accept the delivery. A quirky and charming tidbit of the trade is the variety of tools used. While the long pole was common in the terraced houses of northern England, in other areas, different methods prevailed. Some knocker-uppers used a pea shooter to fire dried peas at their clients' windows, a softer, if slightly more mischievous, approach. In some parts of London, knocker-uppers were simply men who would shout and bang on doors. The profession adapted to the local architecture and customs. Historians still argue about who exactly these knocker-uppers were. Many were older men, no longer fit for the grueling labor of the factories or mines, who could earn a small but steady income with their rounds. In some communities, the job was performed by the local constable as part of his morning duties. It was a respected, if not exactly beloved, position. You were a familiar figure, a part of the daily fabric of the community. People depended on you utterly. As you continue your rounds, the town slowly begins to stir around you. A few lights appear in windows. The smell of coal fires being lit begins to permeate the air. You are the catalyst for the town's awakening. You have performed your duty, a small but vital ritual in the life of the industrial age. But your work tonight deals only with the practicalities of waking the living. In the quiet, rural villages, far from the factory smoke, there are other, more ancient rituals to be performed. Rituals that concern the final sleep of the dead and the heavy burden of their sins. Your next job will take you from the mundane task of waking the body to the mystical task of cleansing the soul. The sharp tapping of your knocker-upper's pole fades, replaced by a profound and heavy silence. You have left the waking industrial towns behind and traveled deep into the rural hinterlands, to a place where folklore and superstition hold more sway than the factory clock. You stand before a small, isolated cottage where a vigil is being held for the recently deceased. The air is thick with grief, but also with a palpable fear. You have been summoned here not to comfort the living, but to perform a service for the dead. You are a sin-eater. This is perhaps the most mysterious and folkloric of all the 18th century professions. Your role is not one of physical labor, but of spiritual transaction. You are a pariah, a person who lives on the absolute fringes of society, shunned and feared by the very people who require your services. You are called only in the event of a death, a last resort for a family desperate to ensure the peaceful passage of a loved one's soul. Inside the cottage, the body of the deceased lies on a table or a bed. The family stands back as you approach, their faces a mixture of sorrow and revulsion. They do not speak to you. You are an instrument, not a guest. Upon the chest of the corpse, a crust of bread and a bowl of ale or beer have been placed. This is your ritual meal. The belief, a powerful and deeply ingrained piece of folk religion, is that this food and drink have absorbed the sins of the deceased. By consuming them, you will take those sins into your own body, thus cleansing the soul of the departed and allowing them to rest in peace, unburdened by their earthly transgressions. You stand over the body, murmur a quiet incantation or prayer, and then you eat the bread and drink the ale. It is a somber, silent act. The family watches, holding their breath. In this moment, you are a vessel, a spiritual scapegoat. You are taking on the moral failings of another person. Their lies, their greed, their anger, all of it, for a meager fee. Once the ritual is complete, the family will give you your payment, typically a few coins, and then immediately drive you from the house, often shouting curses and throwing things at you to ensure you take the sins with you and do not linger. You came as an outcast, and you will leave as an even greater one, now burdened with the spiritual weight of another's life. The mainstream historical context for this practice is complex. It existed in a gray area between Christian doctrine and older pagan beliefs about death and the afterlife. The official church, both Catholic and Protestant, condemned the practice as heretical blasphemy. To them, only God, through Christ, could forgive sins. The sin-eater was seen as a practitioner of dark magic, a usurper of divine authority. Yet, for the common folk in isolated regions like the Welsh Marches or parts of Scotland, the fear of a loved one's soul being trapped or damned was so great that they were willing to turn to these forbidden rituals. It was a form of spiritual insurance. A truly quirky tidbit is the description of the last known sin-eater, Richard Munslow, who died in 1906. While this is much later than our 18th century setting, his story provides a rare, documented glimpse into the practice. Munslow was, by all accounts, a respectable farmer, not the usual destitute outcast. He apparently took up the role after the death of his own children, perhaps as a form of penance or out of a genuine belief that he could help his community. His story complicates the image of the sin-eater as purely a transaction of poverty, suggesting a deeper, more complex spiritual motivation for some. Historians still argue intensely about the very existence of sin-eaters. The evidence is almost entirely based on folklore, anecdotal accounts, and the writings of antiquarians who were often recording stories they'd heard, not events they'd witnessed. There are very few primary source documents that describe the practice. Was the sin-eater a real, established profession, however rare, or was it more of a symbolic folktale, a story told to express anxieties about death and judgment? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The belief in sin-eating was very real, and it's plausible that in certain isolated communities, desperate and ostracized individuals were willing to perform the role in exchange for food and money, fulfilling a powerful psychological need for the grieving. You are cast out of the cottage, the fee clutched in your hand, the weight of another's life now metaphorically resting on your shoulders. You are utterly alone, a figure of dread in the moonlit landscape. You have traded your own social standing for the peace of another's soul. This job is about the appearance of things, a ritual to smooth the passage from this world to the next. The world of appearances is also paramount for the living, especially for the wealthy. As you wander away from the grieving cottage, your mind turns from the unadorned world of rural superstition to the highly artificial and ornamental world of high society, and the strange, often dirty, work required to maintain its elaborate facade. You leave the heavy, spiritual silence of the sin-eater's world and re-enter the bustling, fashionable heart of the city. The grim realities of death and the afterlife are forgotten here, replaced by the far more pressing concerns of social status, appearance, and the latest trends. You find yourself in the workshop of a peruke maker, a craftsman who creates the elaborate, powdered wigs that are the absolute height of 18th century fashion for the upper classes. But you are not the master craftsman. You are the wig maker's assistant, and your job is to handle the raw materials. The workshop is a strange place, smelling of pomade, powder, and faintly of other people. Bunches of human hair, in all colors and textures, hang from the walls like bizarre trophies. Wooden wig stands, each with a featureless, carved head, stare blankly from shelves. Your first task of the day is sorting. A large sack has just arrived, filled with hair purchased from, well, it's best not to ask too many questions. The hair comes from peasant girls selling their locks for a few coins, from prisoners, from the bodies of the dead you might have encountered in your life as a resurrectionist. Your job is to untangle this mass, sort it by length and color, and pick out any lice, dirt, or other debris. It's meticulous, unpleasant work. You sit for hours combing and separating the strands. The hair is often greasy, matted, and carries the scent of its previous owner. It's a very intimate, yet completely anonymous, connection to dozens of strangers. This sorted hair must then be cleaned and prepared. You will boil it in a large vat, a process that both sterilizes it and kills any remaining nits. Then it must be dried and sometimes dyed to achieve the fashionable shades of white, gray, or bluish silver that are in demand. The mainstream historical fact is that the wig, or peruke, was more than just a fashion accessory. It was an essential part of the gentleman's wardrobe, originating in the 17th century French court of Louis XIII, who started wearing them to hide his premature baldness. Wigs became a symbol of aristocracy and social standing across Europe. They were expensive, elaborate, and required constant maintenance. A gentleman of means might own several, a formal one for court appearances, a simpler one for daily wear, and perhaps an old one for traveling. For women, while they didn't typically wear full wigs like men, they used extensive hairpieces, pads, and false curls to create the towering, complex hairstyles of the period. Once the hair is clean and sorted, the real artistry begins, though it's still not your job. The master peruke maker will take the prepared hair and painstakingly weave it, strand by strand, onto a fine net or silk foundation that has been custom fitted to the client's head. Your role is to assist. You hand him the correct lengths of hair, you keep the tools clean, and you perform the final, messy step, the powdering. A finished wig is not complete until it is coated in a thick layer of scented powder. This powder was typically made from finely milled starch or flour, sometimes scented with orange blossom or lavender. The powdering process was notoriously messy. A client would often sit in a special chair in a designated powder room or closet, wearing a protective gown and a cone-shaped mask over their face to avoid inhaling the dust. Your job is to use a large bellows or a puff to blast the wig with powder until it is perfectly and evenly white. You end up covered in the stuff. It gets in your hair, your lungs, your clothes. It's a bit like working in a very posh, very inefficient bakery where nothing ever gets baked. A quirky tidbit about these wigs is their complex relationship with hygiene. While they are often seen as a sign of the era's filthiness, they actually served a practical purpose in a time when bathing was infrequent. It was much easier to keep a wig clean than one's own long hair. You could send the wig to be deloused and powdered, while keeping your own hair cropped short underneath. This helped to combat head lice, a rampant problem. So, in a strange way, these artificial hairdos were a clever, if cumbersome, solution to a persistent pest problem, one you might have once been paid to solve with a terrier. Historians still argue about the true cost and economic impact of the wig trade. These were not cheap items. A single, high-quality wig could cost more than a common laborer earned in a year. The industry employed thousands of people, from hair collectors in poor villages to master craftsmen in the city, to assistants like yourself. It was a massive supply chain built on vanity, social pressure, and a very specific definition of what it meant to be well-dressed. As you clean the powder from the workshop floor at the end of the day, you look at the finished product on its stand. It is a perfect, sculpted, lifeless mountain of white. It bears no trace of its dirty, humble origins, the matted sack of hair, the boiling vat, the lice. It is a symbol of aristocratic refinement, built on the hidden, messy labor of people like you. This theme of hidden, dirty work being essential to the lives of the wealthy continues in your next job, which will take you from the heights of fashion to the narrow, dark, and dangerous confines of their very homes. You leave the powder-dusted air of the wig maker's shop behind, trading the task of creating artificial elegance for a job that is grounded in the grimiest reality of urban living. You are small, you are nimble, and you are about to be employed for these very qualities in one of the most infamous and dangerous jobs of the era. You are a chimney sweep, or more accurately, a climbing boy. Your master, a gruff man with a permanent layer of soot etched into the lines of his face, leads you to your first job of the day, a grand townhouse in a wealthy square. The residents are still asleep. Your workday, like the knocker-uppers, starts in the dark and the cold. The purpose of your job is simple. The coal and wood fires that heat these large homes produce a thick, black, flammable residue called creosote, which builds up on the inside of the chimneys. If it's not cleaned out regularly, it can catch fire, leading to a disastrous house fire. Your master has a contract to clean the chimneys, and you are his primary tool. He points to a chimney stack on the roof. Your job is to climb it. From the inside, you are stripped down to your trousers, sometimes to nothing at all, as clothes can snag on the rough brickwork inside the narrow flue. Your master hands you a small, flat brush and a scraper. You will need these to dislodge the hardened soot. He then leads you to the fireplace in a large, drafty drawing room. The fire has been out for hours, but the chimney is still warm. Up you go, he grunts. This is the moment of truth. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of old smoke, and begin to climb. The flue is impossibly narrow, perhaps only 9 inches square. You have to move like an inchworm, bracing your back against one side and pushing with your knees and elbows on the other. It is pitch black. The only way is up, towards a tiny square of gray light far above. The soot is everywhere. It immediately coats your skin, gets in your eyes, your mouth, your nose. It's a thick, greasy, acrid powder that chokes you with every breath. You have to keep moving, scraping, and brushing as you go. The soot rains down on you, a constant, suffocating shower. Your elbows and knees are scraped raw by the rough brick and mortar. This is why masters preferred to employ very young children, typically orphans or those sold by destitute parents, for this work. A child of 5 or 6 was small and pliable enough to fit into the narrowest of flues. The mainstream historical fact is that the life of a climbing boy was brutal and short. The constant inhalation of soot led to a host of respiratory illnesses and a unique and terrible affliction known as chimney sweep's cancer, a cancer of the scrotum caused by the constant irritation from the carcinogenic soot collecting in the folds of the skin. It was the first occupationally linked cancer to be discovered, identified by surgeon Percival Pott in 1775. The boys were often malnourished, mistreated, and lived in constant fear. As you climb, you fight a rising sense of panic. The confined space is terrifying. Getting stuck was a very real and often fatal danger. A boy who got wedged in a narrow bend could suffocate. Sometimes, the only way to get him out was to break open the chimney from the outside, a costly repair that would infuriate the homeowner and earn the boy a savage beating from his master, if he survived. A quirky and horrifying tidbit of the trade was the master's method for encouraging a hesitant or stuck boy. They would often light a small fire in the grate below, the smoke and heat forcing the child to scramble upwards to escape being burned. You can hear your master's voice yelling from below, telling you to hurry up. You keep climbing, your muscles screaming in protest, your lungs burning. You are not just cleaning a chimney. You are fighting for every inch, for every breath. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, your head emerges from the top of the chimney pot. You are on the roof of London, the city spread out below you like a map. The cold, fresh air is the greatest luxury you have ever known. But there is no time to rest. You have to clean the other flues in the house. You will spend your entire day climbing up and down these dark, suffocating tunnels. Historians still argue about the public's awareness and acceptance of this brutal form of child labor. While reformers and philanthropists began to campaign against the practice in the late 18th century, progress was slow. Many people, including homeowners and politicians, saw it as a necessary evil. They wanted their chimneys cleaned to prevent fires, and this was the established method. The invention of mechanical brushes that could be pushed up chimneys existed, but masters resisted them, as boys were cheaper and, they argued, more thorough. It would take decades of public outcry and new laws in the 19th century to finally end the practice. At the end of the day, you are paid not in coin, but with a space on the floor to sleep and a meager meal. You try to wash, but the soot is so ingrained in your skin that you will never be truly clean. You are marked, inside and out, by your profession. As you fall into an exhausted sleep, you dream of open spaces, of wide, muddy riverbanks where the sky isn't a tiny square at the top of a dark tunnel. It's on those riverbanks that another kind of scavenging, another kind of desperate work, takes place every single day. The suffocating darkness of the chimney gives way to the vast, open, and yet equally grimy expanse of the River Thames at low tide. You have escaped the narrow flues, but you have not escaped poverty. You are now a mudlark, and the muddy, garbage-strewn riverbed is your workplace. You are a child or perhaps an elderly person, someone too young, too old, or too infirm for more structured labor. Your only tools are your sharp eyes and your bare feet, though some more fortunate mudlarks might have a small bag or a stick for probing the mud. The tide is out, exposing a wide, stinking shoreline of dark, viscous ooze. This is the river's great repository, a catch-all for everything the city discards, loses, or dumps. And somewhere in that mess, there is treasure, or at least something you can sell for a few pennies. You roll up your trousers or hoist your skirts and wade into the thick, foul-smelling mud. The sensation is unpleasant, the ooze cold and slimy, squelching up between your toes. The smell is a complex bouquet of decay. Sewage, industrial waste from the tanneries and slaughterhouses upstream, rotting vegetation, and the faint, salty tang of the estuary. This is the underbelly of London, exposed for a few hours twice a day. Your head is down, your eyes scanning the ground with intense focus. You are looking for anything of value. A lost coin, a dropped button, a fragment of pottery, a piece of scrap metal. Your most common finds are lumps of coal that have fallen from the barges that constantly ply the river. These can be gathered and sold to poor families for fuel. Another valuable find is old rope, which can be sold to be unraveled and used for caulking ships. Every small, dark lump in the mud must be investigated. You poke it with your toe, pick it up, and examine it. Most of the time, it's just a rock or a clump of filth. But sometimes it's a find. This is a job of chance and persistence. You might spend an entire tide and find nothing of worth. The next day, you could stumble upon a silver shilling or a dropped piece of jewelry that would feed your family for a week. It's this slim, tantalizing possibility that keeps you and the dozens of other mudlarks coming back day after day. You work in a silent, competitive community. You respect each other's patches but are always aware of what others are finding. A cry of excitement from another mudlark will cause a dozen heads to pop up, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and envy. The mainstream historical fact is that the Thames was London's main artery and its largest open sewer. For centuries, everything was thrown into it. This made mudlarking a surprisingly viable, if grim, way to survive for those on the absolute margins of society. The river was a constantly shifting archive of the city's life, and mudlarks were its unsanctioned archaeologists, sifting through the debris of commerce, daily life, and death. The dangers are numerous. The mud itself can be treacherous, with deep pockets of soft ooze that can act like quicksand. You are constantly wading through untreated sewage and industrial effluent, making cuts and scrapes on your feet a serious risk of infection. Remember the leeches you collected from the marsh? The water here is far more dangerous. The tides themselves are a threat. You must always be aware of the turning tide, as the water can come in surprisingly fast, cutting off your route back to the safety of the river wall. A quirky and rather grim tidbit is the nature of some of the finds. Mudlarks would occasionally discover human bodies, the victims of accident, crime, or suicide. This was a particularly macabre discovery, but it could also be a profitable one. There was often a small reward for reporting the body to the authorities for a proper burial. It's a stark reminder that you are scavenging in a place that has claimed many lives. Historians still argue about the social structure of mudlarking. Was it purely the domain of individuals, or did gangs or families control certain stretches of the riverbank? The writer Henry Mayhew, in his mid-19th century study London Labour and the London Poor, provides vivid descriptions of the mudlarks he interviewed, painting them as a distinct tribe with their own rules and culture. While his work is from a later period, the life he describes was a continuation of a practice that had existed for centuries. He portrays them as fiercely independent and resilient, living by their wits at the very edge of the economy. You find a small, corroded copper nail. It's not much, but it's something. You tuck it into your pocket. Then you see it. A small, dark disc half buried in the mud. You dig it out with your fingers. It's a coin, a halfpenny. Your heart leaps. It's a good find, enough to buy a small loaf of bread. You hold it tight in your fist. A small victory won from the river's foul grasp. You have salvaged something of value from the city's waste. Your life is about creating value from what is discarded. But there is one final, peculiar job that deals not with discarded things, but with a discarded emotion, grief. For your final role, you will be paid to perform the one feeling that should be the most genuine of all. The cold, wet mud of the Thames seems to cling to your ankles as you transition to your final, and perhaps most socially complex, role. You find yourself dressed in sober, dark clothing, standing discreetly at the back of a funeral procession. You are not a relative, a friend, or a colleague of the deceased. You are a professional mourner or a mute, and your job is to add a touch of solemnity and prestige to the proceedings. Your purpose is entirely theatrical. You are an actor in the grand drama of an 18th century funeral. For a wealthy or socially ambitious family, A funeral was not just a time for grief. It was a public statement. It was the final opportunity to display the family's wealth, status, and importance to the community. A large, well-attended funeral with all the proper accoutrements was essential. And if the deceased wasn't popular enough to draw a large crowd naturally, well, a crowd could be rented. That's where you come in. You might be hired simply to swell the numbers, to follow the coffin from the home to the churchyard, looking suitably somber. Your mere presence adds to the perceived importance of the person being buried. For more prestigious funerals, you might be given a more specific role. As a mute, you would be dressed in a long black cloak, a hat with a flowing black band, and given a long, crepe-draped staff. Your job would be to stand, silent and grim-faced, at the doorway of the deceased's home for days leading up to the funeral, and then to lead the procession itself. You are a living, breathing symbol of sorrow. Your expression is your product. You must look melancholic, but not overly distraught. It's a performance of dignified, respectful sadness. No amateurish wailing for you, that's for a different type of hired help. The mainstream historical fact here is that the funeral industry in the 18th century became increasingly elaborate and commercialized. Undertakers emerged as morbid masters of ceremony, offering a complete package of services. The coffin, the hearse, the mourning clothes for the family, and, of course, the professional mourners. It was a competitive business, and undertakers would advertise their services, promising to provide a funeral in the most decent and fashionable manner. This commodification of death rituals was a hallmark of the era's growing consumer culture. Your performance requires discipline. You must stand for hours, often in inclement weather, without fidgeting or speaking. You must maintain a mask of sorrow, even as you think about your pay or what you'll have for dinner. You are a silent observer of genuine grief, and your job is to provide a stoic, mournful backdrop for it. It's a strange and emotionally detached profession. You are surrounded by one of life's most profound experiences, but your connection to it is entirely commercial. A quirky tidbit is the existence of a more boisterous counterpart to the silent mute, the keener. This role, more common in Celtic cultures like Ireland but also found in some parts of England, involved women who were hired to wail, cry, and sing mournful songs or keens for the dead. Their job was the opposite of yours. They were there to perform a loud, public, and cathartic display of grief. A family might hire both mutes for silent dignity and keeners for audible sorrow, covering all the emotional bases. It's like hiring both a classical string quartet and a dramatic opera singer for the same event. Historians still argue about the social perception of professional mourners. Were they seen as respected, if somber professionals, or as cynical opportunists profiting from sorrow? The answer likely depends on who you asked. For the family who hired them, they were a necessary part of a proper funeral. For social critics, they were a sign of society's obsession with empty display and a lack of genuine feeling. Charles Dickens, writing in the next century, would famously satirize the whole pompous affair, particularly the mute, as a symbol of Victorian hypocrisy. This critique had its roots in the 18th century, as people began to question the sincerity of such extravagant, performed grief. The procession reaches the churchyard, the same kind of place you once visited as a resurrectionist. You stand silently by the graveside as the final words are spoken. Your job is nearly done. You have provided the gravitas, the solemnity, the sense of a life well regarded. You have helped to shape the public memory of a person you never knew. Once the family has departed, you will collect your fee from the undertaker and melt back into the city. You have worked in the dark, in the filth, in danger, and in tedium. You have harvested the city's waste, its dead, its pests, its luxuries, its necessities, and finally, its sorrow. You have been a link boy, a gong farmer, a resurrectionist, a pure finder, a powder monkey, a rat catcher, an ice harvester, a pin maker, a leech collector, a knocker-upper, a sin-eater, a wig maker's assistant, a chimney sweep, and a mudlark. And now, as a mute, you have brought this strange journey to its final, quiet close. The world you've walked through is one of incredible ingenuity and incredible hardship, a world where every problem, no matter how peculiar, generated a human solution, a job for someone to do. As you walk away from the graveyard, the city's evening hum begins to rise, a familiar sound. The torches of the Link Boys will soon be lit, starting the cycle all over again. But for you, the day is done. The strange and trying shifts are over. It is time to rest. And now, as our own journey through these forgotten occupations comes to a close, allow the story to fade gently into the background of your thoughts. The world of the 18th century, with all its peculiar challenges and the strange jobs invented to solve them, can recede into the quiet archives of your mind. Let go of the flickering torchlight, the cold river mud, and the heavy silence of the funeral procession. Feel the comfort of your own bed, the gentle weight of your blanket, a world away from the hardships we have just witnessed. The challenges of your own day are done, and the night offers a quiet harbor for rest and gentle replenishment. There are no chimneys to climb, no cesspits to empty, no alarms to set before the sun. There is only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet anchor in the peaceful darkness of your room. Let each breath draw you deeper into a state of calm, releasing any lingering thoughts and allowing your body to sink into a profound and well-deserved sleep.